Talking all things Oklahoma Sooners spring football with Josh McCuistion of Sooner Scoop of On 3. Does a fantastic job talking all things Oklahoma on a day-in, day-out basis. And again, he joins us on the show. Josh, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, absolutely, man. Always, happy to join you. I know we tried to do this once before, and I think that was my fault. So, glad that we can do this. And it feels like we're at that midway point. Like we're starting to football is it's not real yet, but it's starting to feel that way again.
Yeah, Josh, on that note, we got spring games, we got the portal, and if you're into that sort of thing, we got preseason magazine season in about a month or so. I feel like that's when you really know, right? It's starting to heat up. We start diving into the numbers and everything. But let's talk, obviously, Oklahoma Sooners football. The spring game is set for this weekend, but I want to start with this, Josh. A 10-win season last year. Life in the SEC is set to begin this fall. From what you've been able to pick up on, has there been a different sense of urgency knowing that life in the Southeastern Conference is just around the corner and it's going to take maybe a new level of Oklahoma football to compete week in, week out and uphold the standard, I should say, of what Sooners fans are used to?
It's an interesting question because, you'll talk to people that will tell you, I know guys that have played for him, coached for him. They'll talk about Brent Venables being about the most consistent person they've ever met. Like Brent Venables wakes up at the same time every day. He does the same thing. Like he just doesn't know variation. He only knows kind of one speed. And anybody that's been around Brent for 10 minutes knows it's 100 miles an hour. Like that's the way he operates. And so I think obviously when Brent arrived, there was no need, if Lincoln Riley had stayed, you have the whole situation where, okay, maybe we do have to key this up. Maybe we've got to change the way we're doing things. As to where Brent Venables arrived, and he knew what the challenge was in a couple of years. So I think they have tried to set that tone really from word go. Like, this is how we're going to do things. This is, we're not going to deviate in a couple of years. Now, what I think is interesting from that perspective, Brent Venables in particular, is that the change in defensive coordinator, to Zac Alley this year. And we may get into this a little bit later, but I think that's allowed a lot of freedom for him. So I wonder how much that changes his routine a little bit. But as far as like pace, the scheduling, the way they want to do things, I really don't think they want anything to change because I think they set this in a pattern that they felt was going to be the right thing once they got to the SEC.
Now, Josh, anytime you have a new starting quarterback, that is really going to dominate the headlines when it comes to spring practice, fall practice, what have you. That is the case with Jackson Arnold. Obviously, we saw him in the bowl game against Arizona. We saw the good, we saw the bad, and we saw the ugly. What have you heard from him in regards to his progression and how he's grasping being the dude in Norman and, again, taking Oklahoma into SEC play?
Well, you know how it is. It's so funny because, last year the buzz was huge on Jackson Arnold. Like he may take Dylan Gabriel's job. He's unbelievable. And now, again, like how it is in year two, there becomes this thing where it is very much hang on, sorry, I had some audio playing in my headphone. But no, with Jackson this year, it's like it's normalized. Everybody's, oh yeah, this is the way it goes, and this is the way it all works. And so I think there has been it's not that it's any different. It's just that everybody's calmed a little bit. And in perfect form of what I'm talking about, everybody's talking about the new freshman quarterback. Everybody's excited about him and all his potential and those kind of things. So, but I think Jackson is a guy that, again, we all know Oklahoma made this decision. If they had decided to keep Dylan Gabriel would still be at Oklahoma. If they had said, hey, you're going to be our starter next year, you're our guy. They knew Jackson Arnold was the future. They knew Dylan Gabriel, it was, and you can say it's a decision between a guy that's got 2 or 3 years of eligibility and a guy that just got 1. That's fine. But Oklahoma made a choice. They clearly believe in Jackson Arnold. And again, people go back and watch that Arizona game. There's some throws in there where you're like, that's as good as anybody we've watched do it at Oklahoma. And then there's some moments where like, that's a freshman quarterback. Like he's doing some things that are just slow and his timing's off and that kind of stuff. So again, I think they like how he's progressing, but at the same time, they're realistic that there's going to be some growing pains. That's just inevitable.
Josh, I feel like I've heard all off season long people talking about this offensive line and how Oklahoma might be in for a rude awakening on the line of scrimmage from what you've heard in spring ball. And I know it's spring ball, so it may be the most difficult to draw any sort of conclusions on the lines of scrimmage, right? When you don't know if, hey, this unit has a good day, does the other side suck, and vice versa. But is there reason to believe from what you've heard, the coaching staff, the way they talk about things? Do they feel like they're making positive steps and positive strides on that offensive line where they're going to be set to go this fall? Because again, Josh, I'm sure you guys have heard the noise. They've heard the noise. Everyone is questioning the physicality and the offensive line of scrimmage in Norman.
Absolutely. And I think it's such a spotlight for Oklahoma because not only the move to the SEC, but secondarily, that's not really been a question for Oklahoma for a long time. Like if there was things you knew you could count on, you knew Bill Bedenbaugh and that offensive line were going to be pretty good. I mean, he's, about to hit his second straight year of a first round draft pick. They've got several guys that are looking to be drafted. Oklahoma may have 4 or 5 guys drafted, and 3 of them are going to be off that offensive line. So it tells you where they're coming from. So I think it's a little jarring for OU fans. And I think the first few weeks, that's clear there was very real concern. Like this is not where it has been. There's going to be some things that have to be fixed. It sounds like over the last week, they're starting to, okay, this guy, we kind of like him here. This guy, we like him here. Because again, you're talking about 5 new starters. They're rebuilding everything. So when you add in that Bill Bedenbaugh always uses the spring as a real tinkering operation, he'll mess with, people love to talk about that 2017 group that really at times kind of pushed Georgia around, the Orlando Browns and all those guys, that they had 4 of their 5 starters were NFL draft picks. So it was a really good group. Well, the next year, this is when they actually won the Joe Moore Award. And they really only had one change, but he still was messing with stuff and moving guys around and that kind of thing. So I think there is a lot of this is almost like normal for Oklahoma. Like they're used to playing around with who they've got, who their personnel is. But it does sound like over the last few weeks, last week or so, they're starting to find some things, especially in the run game. I've been told some of the scrimmages are starting to look a little cleaner. And again, Bill Bedenbaugh, I think he's one of the best in the business. I think he'll get Oklahoma where they need to be. But is this going to be a top 3-4 unit in the SEC? No, it's going to be a little bit of a learning process with some young guys, some transfers, and they're going to have to really hope for a healthy season because I think depth is probably their biggest concern.
Now, Josh, you mentioned the defensive side of the football, and of course, that is Brent Venables' calling card. But Zac Alley in as the new defensive coordinator, of course, going to be helping with Brent there. What have you heard about the progression of the defensive side? Year one was a disaster. Last year was much, much better. I feel like it's really important anytime you're a coach that you have a certain side of the football or an identity, if you will, you need to make sure you at least have that hammered down, right? Because you can't be struggling and also your identity not be there because fans kind of feel like you're sort of just lost in the woods. Like, what are we doing, right? Like, we're not even good at the thing we're supposed to be good at. So from what you've heard, again, how Zac Alley has fit into the equation and the progression of the Oklahoma defense this spring.
I think it says a lot that, talking to, some of the guys on our staff at Scoop, some players that have had, Brent Venables has given us a lot of access to practice this year. So we've been able to see a lot more than we're accustomed to seeing. And then, you've got ex-players and things like that can be there any day they want to be. Brent's very open with those kind of things. And you talk to those guys, and they'll talk about, Brent Venables used to basically be Oklahoma's linebackers coach the last 2 years. Like he was over there almost exclusively. Now, Zac Alley took over as defensive coordinator, but he's also the linebackers coach. You'll hear people saying like he was maybe over there for 5 minutes. Like, I mean, it's just very different. And I think it's freed him up to do some things. And I think that takes into your point where you mentioned, you got to be good at the thing you're known for. I've got to think it messes with a coach's psyche if they're not. Like, this is what I do. I'm good at this, like it'd be Brent Venables having bad defenses like Lincoln Riley not being able to score points. Like we know you can do this. You need to be able to do this. So again, defensively, I think they have a lot of confidence. I think that back seven really, again, Billy Bowman, I don't know how familiar his name is to a lot of SEC fans. I say this as calmly as I can because I have nothing but respect for the talent that's in the SEC. he'll be one of the SEC's best safeties immediately. He is very, very good, natural instincts, just a great guy. But what is interesting is he really hasn't played a lot this spring. They've really I think he's had some nagging injuries, and frankly, he's got a lot of experience. So they're kind of letting him just kind of hang around this spring. He's coached up a lot of his guys, but I like the depth. I like the talent. Danny Stutzman is a potential Butkus finalist at linebacker. They've got a lot of pieces that you really like. The question is up front. That is on both sides of the ball. If Oklahoma can be above average along the line of scrimmage, they can have a really nice season. It's going to come down to where does that fall. They're not going to be great, in my opinion, on either side of the line of scrimmage, but can they be good enough to let their playmakers at the second level and third level make plays?
Josh, today's spring standouts are tomorrow's stars. Who are a couple of guys whose names that sort of stood out to you, whether it's, coaches bringing them up or maybe other players highlighting them, right? There's some guys that aren't household names yet, but being there, boots on the ground. And Norman, I'm sure there are guys that have stuck out. Who were a couple that maybe SEC fans should be keeping an eye on that they're not aware of right now that you could see using what they've done in the spring to propel themselves maybe into a starting role and making a big impact this fall?
Yeah, I would start with two offensive guys, both from the portal. Dion Burks, a wide receiver transfer from Purdue. I think some are familiar with him, but with Purdue's offense last year, I think there were times where maybe he didn't get to be showcased the way that he would like to. But he's been a guy almost from day one that everybody's like, oh, he's special. Like, I mean, a lot of speed, a lot of ability to stretch the field, can work underneath. Not a huge guy, probably 5'10", 5'11", but is absolutely a guy that could emerge as OU's number one receiver. And what I think is a kind of an underrated nationally receiver room. Nick Anderson's a young guy that had a big year last year as a redshirt freshman. Big physical guy. He'll come back this year. Jaden Gibson's another one. As another guy that kind of fits your question, Bauer Sharp, a former quarterback at Southeastern Louisiana that that kind of transitioned into being a tight end. Oklahoma's had a lot of luck with guys like this. One is Lane Johnson that is looking at the Hall of Fame in his future for the Eagles right now, but they've really done well with these kind of guys, and he has impressed everyone. I mean, big physical guy, really can do a lot of what Seth Luttrell, the new offensive coordinator, likes. They can, do some two tight end personnel packages with him. He can be in line. He can flex out. They really like him a lot. I would say defensively, maybe the guy. We'll do two defensive tackles just because Oklahoma has a need for one of these guys to emerge. Grayson Halton, a third-year guy out of California. They've liked him a lot. They weren't really expecting to need him the way they have, but Jacob Lacey had to medically retire after having a really nice year for Oklahoma last year. So Halton's he's in that 300-pound range, which has really always been his problem. He's been a little light, but he's very explosive, very athletic. And the last guy I'll say is Jaden Jackson, very quickly. True freshman, has come in. He came in as part of two guys from IMG Academy there in Florida that everybody was talking about his teammate, David Stone. But now you're hearing people talk about Jaden Jackson like he may start the season opener. Like they think he is that good, that advanced. And so I think those are a couple on the defensive side of the ball that I think people want to know a little bit about.
And Josh, you mentioned Seth Luttrell, and I apologize. I completely glossed over. Of course, there's a pair of new coordinators on Oklahoma staff this year with Jeff Lebby taking that job at Mississippi State. Is it a reinventing of the wheel offensively, or is it more so kind of just picking up with what Jeff Lebby did, and we can expect the Oklahoma offense to look very similar this fall? What you've gathered from spring practice, of course.
Well, there's a new quarterback, a new defensive coordinator, two new offensive coordinators, and the rebuilt offensive and defensive lines. I don't know how you missed that one change. Like, I don't. It's been so little and so status quo in Norman this offseason. But no, I think you are going to see a lot of similarities. I think over time, like if Seth Luttrell's OU's offensive coordinator for 4 or 5 years, I think you'll see a deviation. If I was going to say the one thing that I think is the clear difference between Seth Luttrell and Jeff Lebby is you're going to see a slower pace. Oklahoma is not going to be hurry up, trying to hurry up on 4th and 1. Jeff Lebby is just constant pace. And I think Seth Luttrell has that in his game. I mean, he's a Mike Leach guy. Like he knows about the kind of the controlling the flow of play and how you want to do that. But at the same time, he's perfectly fine on 4th and 2. We're going to, we'll line up, we'll look at what we've got, and then we can make some changes if we want to. So I think pace of play is probably the most noticeable difference because, we know what they've had has been working pretty well for Oklahoma. They're not going to go reinvent the wheel just to do so. But I think over time, you'll see more of his fingerprint kind of start to take over the offense.
Josh, biggest surprise from spring practice? Has anything jumped out that maybe you didn't expect, or has it been business as usual for the Sooners?
I would say probably the biggest surprise has been kind of the running back room, and I would say it's almost a negative surprise. I like at some point, Oklahoma is gonna have to get back to having a difference maker at running back. And a couple years ago, when Oklahoma played in that bowl game, you mentioned 2022 being a really disappointing year for Oklahoma. They lose all these guys that are, all the NFL entries didn't partake in the bowl game. Florida State brings everybody back. A tale of 2 years for Florida State. One year everybody plays, and the next year nobody does. But with that game, Oklahoma played Florida State, to the end there. And really, if it weren't for a late fumble, may win that game. And had a couple of running backs that go over 100 yards, a couple of freshmen. And you thought, okay, Oklahoma's starting to figure it out here at running back. They've got a couple of guys. One of these guys is going to emerge. Those two were Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes. Javonte Barnes was hurt most of last year, had all sorts of foot problems, hip problems. It was kind of a wide array of things. And so you kind of thought, okay, maybe he emerges this spring. Well, Gavin Sawchuk really had injuries at the beginning of last year. And as the year went on, got better and better. And you kind of thought, okay, maybe this is his time. It just really hasn't happened. And, you don't hear bad things. I think the running back room is solid. It's fine. But you kind of wonder that they signed, on three's number one running back in the country, Taylor Tatum, out of East Texas. And he'll be there in the summer. You kind of wonder if maybe he starts pushing for time because he will be the most talented back on that roster. It's just a matter of, is he ready or is he not? But again, when you look at those great Oklahoma teams, those great Oklahoma offenses, almost invariably they had a difference maker at running back, whether it was, a mutant like Adrian Peterson or just a really good player like Rodney Anderson. And like I mentioned, that 2017 year where they had the great offense with Baker Mayfield and CeeDee Lamb and all those pieces. But they need someone to emerge at running back to really give them that threat. And again, take some of that pressure off of that offensive line that is going to have some growing pains early in the year.
Josh, let's talk about the spring game that's set to take place this weekend. Fingers crossed. Obviously, it is not weather affected. What are you most looking forward to seeing in the spring game? And what do you think Oklahoma fans most want to see from this football team?
I think it is going for me. I want to see the pass rush. I want to see what Oklahoma looks like off the edge because to me, that is the difference between this being a solid defense that maybe wears down as games go on, or it's a defense that can get off the field and stay fresh for 4 quarters. And they have some pieces. R. Mason Thomas is a kid out of the Miami area that they got. Was one of the first additions to the class when Brent Venables took over in Norman. Has been injured is really his first 2 years, but he's a very explosive edge guy, kind of what you'd expect out of South Florida, about 6'1", 245, and can really, really go. And so I think they'll expect him to be a difference maker coming off the corner for them. PJ Adebawore is a former 5-star recruit, very raw when he arrived, but you're starting to hear whispers that it's the light starting to come on for him. And so I want to watch that. For the fans, there's no question. It's exactly what we've talked about. That is the offensive line. They know that this team's only going to go as far as that offensive line can keep Jackson Arnold safe. Like that, they know that's just the way this season's going to play. And almost anything else on this team can be overcome by, whether it's smoke and mirrors or whatever you want to call it. They can be competitive. But if that offensive line isn't where they need it to be, it's obviously going to be a real problem, especially as you head in to the SEC where you're facing just draft pick after draft pick on the defensive line.
And Josh, on that note, last thing, and I'll get you out of here. I know I asked at the beginning of our conversation about the energy surrounding spring ball and knowing that life on the SEC awaits them in a few months. But Do you sense kind of a chip on the shoulder as well? Because I feel like for the most part, the chatter is about Texas, and maybe people are talking about Oklahoma as, man, there's a rough year incoming for the Sooners, 2 new coordinators, questions on the line of scrimmage. Do you sense a chip on the shoulder? I feel like we see it on social media with maybe the fan base, but do you feel that energy coming from the team? Because I sit here and think I wouldn't blame them if they kind of took on this approach of us against the world. With, I mean, you even see the Vegas win total and, what people are projecting for OU football this year. Is that something you've heard them talk about, or you feel like, hey, there is this wanting to go out there and prove everyone wrong, that, hey, we deserve the love and the attention too, and the respect as well?
I don't think there's any question. I think that is absolutely in play, and it's just so strange because when this was announced, it was like, oh, that's going to be, and I heard SEC fans, I heard OU fans, I even heard some Texas fans like, oh, this is going to be tough on Texas. Like the water's about to get deeper, and they've been bailing water for a while. But now, for the first year in forever, the prospects for Texas look better than Oklahoma, and that's a wild thing, to kind of accept. But that just is what it is. But Oklahoma will say, we beat those guys. The only time we played them, we beat them on a neutral field. And so I think there is something of a chip on their shoulder because they know. I mean, again, this is one of those things where I certainly understand why SEC fans would say, oh, this team's overmatched. This is a really talented football team at a program that really doesn't do anything but win football games. So I think there is something of okay, doubt us, that's fine. Now we'll see. I keep trying to tell the fans, like, this is the margin for error is just so much smaller than you're accustomed to. And so again, that's going to be really interesting. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch Oklahoma navigate where you watched Oklahoma for the last decade. They would struggle in these games where they shouldn't. And I didn't think it was anything to do with they got out coached or out schemed. It just didn't look like they were that locked into play that day. Does that carry over? I don't think so. And so I think that can be a good thing for Oklahoma because when there's no point when you're going to walk into Auburn, the second SEC game of the year, and say, oh, yeah, we'll just take care of business here, as to where you might walk into Lawrence, Kansas, and think, this will be fine. We're going to take care of business here. We're way more talented than they are. So I wonder if that maybe helps the thing that has, frankly, been a stumbling block for Oklahoma, at various points over the last decade or so.
Josh McCuistion of Sooner Scoop, the On3 affiliate, talking all things Oklahoma Sooners on a day in, day out basis, does a fantastic job. Josh, appreciate you taking the time, my friend. Let's definitely do this again soon.
Absolutely. Anytime.